Hello, and how are you feeling? Welcome to Series 3, Episode 3 of Coaching from Not a Blue Tree with me, Gary Burns. This episode is all about the prime directives of the unconscious mind. So for very simple purposes, everything we do in NLP is a lot of it is about the human mind. And the difference between the conscious mind, which is where we do our logical, rational thinking, and our unconscious mind, which does just about everything else. And one of the reasons that the unconscious mind is so important is because it has so much more, processing power than the conscious mind does. We can undertake huge tasks on an unconscious level in a way which we would simply not be able to do if we tried to do things consciously. So from an NLP perspective, there are 20 prime directives of the unconscious mind does and how it operates. And be very clear, it is an illustration. It's to simplify the processes in a way that we can make sense of and which we can use to enhance what we do, how we address the challenges in life, how we set and achieve the goals, we make the plans to get to where we want to be. And the reason we have them very early on in any study of NLP is because they underpin our understanding of the unconscious mind. And once you get your head around the 20 prime directives and what they mean, you can then start to think about how you can use that knowledge and use the power of the unconscious mind to achieve all that you want to achieve, to get to where you want to be. So in today's podcast, I'm going to go through the 20 prime directives, not necessarily in the order which we would study them if we were doing this from an academic perspective, but in a way that which I hopefully makes sense of those prime directives and how we can use them. So the first thing to remember is that one of the prime directives of the unconscious mind is that the unconscious mind is the domain of the emotions. And what we mean by that is that all our emotional responses to any given situation in any moment comes directly from the unconscious. We don't just sit there experiencing life and then think, what emotion am I going to respond to this with? We simply respond with the emotion. Things happen, we become angry. Things happen, we laugh, we smile. Things happen and we cry. We get excited, we feel frustrated. We go through the whole range of emotions, and that emotional response comes up from the unconscious and catches us in the moment. And when we look back on past experiences, we can look back and we can remember what happened, and we can remember how we responded emotionally to that event. And that's quite an important thing to understand. Because for the things that we hold on to, for the things that we can't let go of, particularly the things that trigger negative emotions, we're not experiencing the unconscious emotional response to what happened in the past. We had that unconscious emotional response in the moment, but when we think about it now, we're generating that emotion from a very different place. And this serves us in many ways. First of all, it serves us to understand that our emotional responses are our emotional responses. And if we start to understand what things trigger what emotional response in us, we can start to make decisions around, do we want to have that emotional response? Do we want to be able to respond in a different way? And that's particularly useful, I always think, if you're someone who gets very angry by things or gets very upset or quite often feels very hurt by things that have happened. Again, it can be useful if you're carrying a lot of fear or a lot of guilt or a lot of frustration. All those negative emotions that can pull us down, can make us feel far less than satisfied with life. And if we start to understand that those emotional responses are coming from the unconscious, we can start to think about, I can't change that instant reaction to what's going on, but I can start to think about what is it about those situations that triggers that response, and how might I want to look at it differently. And that then gives us the option of starting to respond in different ways. So if you're someone who gets angry very quickly and finds yourself being angry a lot of the time, rather than trying to control the emotion itself, it's much better and much more effective to start to look at those situations which trigger the emotional response and starting to understand what we might want to do differently in those situations, what new perspective we might want to take. Now, several of the prime directives refer to the memory function of the unconscious mind. So in that sense, we know that the unconscious mind is where we store our memories. We know that our unconscious mind organises all of those memories. We also know that it can repress memories, particularly those with unresolved negative emotions. And similarly, it can repress the stuff, but equally it can present those repressed memories for resolution. And it's important to remember that it may keep some of those repressed emotions repressed forever, for protection. So let's think about all of those in terms. First of all, we know that our unconscious mind is where we store all our memories. And the unconscious mind stores those memories in two ways. It stores those memories chronologically, so in the sense of time. So we know that something that happened yesterday is different from something that happened 10 years ago. It also, though, stores the memories in gestalts, so in collections of similar memories. And the way I always think about this is it's like having a series of filing cabinets, and each filing cabinet having a label on the drawer, which is where we put the similar memories. So we might have a gestalt, a filing cabinet drawer, which is where we store the memories of all the different houses we've lived in. We might have a filing cabinet drawer, a gestalt for all the holidays we've had. We have a filing cabinet for all the times we've experienced joy or happiness. And the reality is, if they were filing cabinets, there'd be millions and millions of them, because every single different type of memory would form its own gestalt, its own collection. And again, this helps us in a number of ways. First of all, it allows us to get perspective of how recent or not events are. How long ago did something happen? And how healthy is it to still be holding on, again, particularly to the negative emotions? And when we sometimes find either ourselves or aware of people who are a bit stuck in the past, what is it about the past that's holding them back? What is it about the present that they're avoiding? The really useful aspect of understanding how the unconscious mind stores memory is thinking about those gestalts, those collections of memories. Because quite often those collections of memories are not just about the events, but about the emotions attached to those events as well. And it can give us a sense of, are there recurring things that have happened that lead to particularly negative emotions? Are there gestalts that we can access that actually bring us great joy, great happiness when we look back upon those collections of memories? And also, as we'll look in a future podcast, is how reliable those memories actually are. Because I don't want to preempt what I'm going to be talking about in a future podcast, but all our memories are based upon what we've created in our own minds. And that creation may not be the accurate reflection of what happened that we believe it to be. And sometimes we need to revisit those memories, whether it's in the chronology and the timeline of those events, or whether it's in those collections, in those gestalts. Now, one thing that the unconscious mind definitely does, it can repress memories with unresolved negative emotions. And that's a protection mechanism. And you may well have read about, or you may have experienced yourself, where something really, really terrible happens and people report having simply no memory whatsoever of what happened in that moment. And that's a protection. That's the unconscious mind saying, you don't need to keep seeing that. You don't need to keep reliving that, because that's really, really traumatic for you. So we need to hide that away. So you know that something happened, you've got a sense of what it may be, but the exact detail of it, no. You don't need to know that. And I have my own experience of that on quite a minor scale, but I do, because I know, because various people have told me, that just before my 3rd birthday, I fell down a complete flight of stairs. I have no memory of it happening, no recollection at all. I'm told I screamed my head off. They took me off to hospital to get me checked over, and I have no memory of that whatsoever. Because my unconscious mind is saying, you don't need to experience the fear you experienced in those moments at the age of 3, tumbling down the stairs, and the pain that caused, and the discomfort, and what happened afterwards. You just don't need to know that. So be aware that stuff may well have happened, and that you have no memory of. And it then raises the question, is there anything to be gained by pursuing that understanding? And going back a few years now, there was quite a lot in various media outlets from various sources about regression therapy and young people, and older people for that matter, going through regression therapy and discovering sort of terrible forms of abuse that had happened. And then sometimes afterwards there was a big question mark of, had that really happened? Was our unconscious mind giving us something else? Because that's what it can do. We'll come on to that in a moment. But the important thing to be aware of here is there may be stuff that's happened to us that we have no memory of. And that's for a purely protective purpose. The crucial thing to remember that if the time is right, our unconscious mind will bring that repressed memory into our awareness, because our unconscious mind in that moment believes that we are ready to resolve the issue. And that's a useful thing to know and a useful thing to learn from, because if you suddenly find the most random of thoughts, a memory of a past event that you hadn't ever really thought about suddenly coming to mind, that's your unconscious mind saying, you are now ready to deal with this. Even if it's just to think, well, so that's what happened. I can now let that go. I can now move on from that. No longer need to keep that as something that's unresolved, because there is nothing to resolve. It may equally be that you need to do some work around what happened, what that means for you. It might mean having conversations with other people. But when those memories do come into your consciousness, it's telling you there is something to do with it. There is something to do there. And there is potentially something to be gained. And of course, your unconscious mind may keep those things hidden forever. Now, equally, what can happen, the unconscious mind can present what's called a screen memory. So it creates something that is not true, but acts as a kind of metaphor for what remains repressed. And again, if that comes into your mind, comes into your consciousness, then it's really useful to remember that this is because there is something now for you to learn, that you are now ready to learn, which perhaps in the past you were not ready to do so. Just to think about that in summary, your unconscious mind is sorting out, organising and storing all of your memories. It can keep some of your memories repressed simply for protection. It can bring those memories into your awareness, either using a true memory itself, so an actual event, or a screen memory, something it creates so you can resolve the issue. And it may keep stuff repressed forever. And by understanding how we store things in order of time, so chronologically, and how we organise things in collections, in gestalts, that gives us an understanding of how our memory works and how we can use that to our advantage. The next two functions really of the unconscious mind are to run the body and preserve it. So our unconscious mind deals with all the stuff around breathing, regulating body temperature, our heartbeat, regulates our digestive system. All those things that just happen. And when we injure ourselves, the unconscious mind takes over the healing process. Now, that doesn't mean that we can just think ourselves better. So if you think about breaking a bone, for example, we would definitely want to go to hospital. We would definitely want to have the bone put back into the right position so that as the body takes over the healing of the fracture, the bone heals in exactly the right position. It'll heal itself anyway, given time, but we want to do it so that it is as true to the original unbroken bone as is possible for it to be. And it's important to remember that that's one of the functions of the unconscious mind. And it's also quite useful, and particularly with clients who are reporting repeatedly feeling under the weather, out of sorts, whatever it may be, that there's a function within hypnosis there to remind the unconscious mind that that's its function. So the next prime directive is about the unconscious mind being a highly moral being. And this is a really interesting one, I think, because at first look, it feels like it's suggesting that we have some sort of innate sense of right and wrong, of what's good and what's bad. And nothing could be further from the truth. We will each have a moral compass of some sort. And that will be what we've learned from our parents, from our families, from our peer groups and so on. And that will give us a sense of what's acceptable, what's not. What's okay and what's not. What's permissible and what's not. And once we have that moral compass, our unconscious mind will govern our actions and our thoughts and reactions to events and things that we do, things that happen around us, based on that moral compass. And it's useful to know that we can change that moral compass. We can change how we see ourselves and by what set of morals we want to live by. And quite often that's where you see pushback from people against perhaps their family background, their upbringing, the kind of people they've spent time with. Because what they're seeing is there is a morality there that doesn't fit with their individual beliefs. That could be you. You may have been brought up in a certain way and actually feel that wasn't right for you. So we can rewrite that moral code at any time if we want to. Now, one thing about the unconscious mind is it enjoys serving, so it enjoys making happen what we want to happen, but it really needs clear orders to follow. And this is where knowing this is really useful for goal setting. Because quite often people talk about wanting to be richer, wanting to be healthier. Now, if you tell your unconscious mind that you want to be richer, it will see that pound coin lying in the street. And it will tick that task off because you are now a pound better off than you were previously. If, however, you tell your unconscious mind that you want to be earning, I don't know, £100 more a month, £500 more a month, £1,000 more a month, it will then bring into your awareness the opportunities to make that happen. It will show you the side hustle. It will bring into your awareness the job vacancies, the career opportunities that will allow you to meet that very clear instruction of how much more you want to be earning. And that applies for any form of goal. The more specific you are, the better your unconscious mind will respond and bring things into your awareness that will help you achieve that goal. Next, we have the prime directive, which tells us that the unconscious mind controls and maintains all perceptions. And that's an important one, not because we can learn to do it any better, although in some ways we can, but this is more about trusting those senses, that sixth sense, that slight sense of unease, the sense that something's not quite right here, or suddenly that sense of this is the path to follow. And the reason it's important to be aware of that is because our unconscious mind is picking up on and processing data far more quickly than we can do consciously. So all the information that's coming in which consciously we just haven't got a hope in hell's chance of sifting through and fully understanding, our unconscious is doing that outside of our awareness, but then is letting those bells ring, is making us aware of something going on. And it's learning to trust that. Sometimes we need to take a step back and just check what's going on. But the fact that the message is there, that's the suggestion, that's the indication that there's more for us to do, more for us to look into. One thing that the unconscious mind is really responsible for is controlling, storing, generating, and transmitting energy. And that can be on a very literal level. Our unconscious mind knows when we're getting tired. Our unconscious mind knows when we need that sudden burst of energy. And sometimes we consciously need to remind the unconscious mind that that's what we want. And I'm quite astonished how on the days when I'm starting to flag, usually mid-afternoon, and I've got something that I really need to finish and really need to get my head around, I find that if I consciously focus on drawing the energy that will allow me to do the task and do it well, suddenly my unconscious mind is responding and bringing that energy there. And it's also equally important to listen when we're getting a sense of, I need to take a break now. Because that's the unconscious mind saying, I'm starting to run a bit on empty here. You need to do something so that I can recharge. And much like as I talked about before, that it controls and maintains all perceptions, the unconscious mind also maintains our instincts and generates habits. And that's really important. Our unconscious mind likes repetition so that we can get that habit done. And that, again, is one of the presuppositions, that we need repetition until a habit is installed. Very rare for us to be able to do a new behaviour once, and that's it. It's installed, we know what we're doing, tucked away in our unconscious mind, and we can just get on and do it. And there's an interesting thing about all of this, that there is a view that you have to do something. I've read anything from sort of 10 times to 21 times to 30 times. And that's just not true. We're all different, and different tasks will take us different numbers of repetition times before that habit is installed. The trick is to understand that we do have to keep repeating it, and then suddenly, one day, it's there. And if you think back to learning to drive, which feels incredibly difficult when you first start, there is that sudden moment when you're doing things automatically. And because you're doing it automatically, you don't even realise you're doing it. That you've crossed that threshold. It's gone from being a conscious action to an unconscious action, and suddenly you're there. One important thing to remember about the unconscious mind is that it is programmed to continually seek more and more. And this is where we can end up, and this is why it feels quite uncomfortable being stuck in a rut, that sense of same old, same old. Because on one hand, that's really comfortable and really easy for us. But on the other hand, our unconscious mind just doesn't like that. It likes the sense of growth. It likes the sense of doing things differently, of learning more, of doing new things. And when we get that sense of being stuck in a rut, we can either just sink back in it and think, well, there's nothing else I can do. Or we can start thinking, no, hang on a minute. If I want my unconscious mind to be working it in sort of its best possible way, then I need to be giving it that. And it's not saying you have to go out and sort of create, the eighth wonder of the world, write that piece of literature that wins the Nobel Prize, create that pop song that becomes iconic and crosses generations. Absolutely not. It can be as simple as taking a walk in a different direction, learning to cook a new recipe, taking up a new hobby, reading another book, listening to a different piece of music to what you might usually listen to. The possibilities there are endless. And I think it's a good one to remember when you're thinking about what do I want to do with my time. Whether that's time in work, whether that's time outside of work, whether that's time with family, with friends, whatever it happens to be. It's that sense of what more can I be adding to my life? Because if you do that, our unconscious mind tends to be a lot more content. And that leads very neatly onto the next prime directive, because what this is saying is that the unconscious mind functions best as a whole integrated unit. And I'm sure you, like me, have had times when it feels like we're at one with our mind. Everything is just happening very smoothly, seemingly very easily. And then other times we go out to do things and it feels like there's a constant tension, a constant conflict between what we want to achieve and what's going on inside our heads. And when that tension is there, it's worth exploring what's causing it. What's that coming from? What is the root cause? Because if we can understand what that is, we can then find resolution. And that resolution is so important because our unconscious mind wants to work seamlessly. It wants to function as a whole. It really doesn't like it when there's conflict, when something is not right, when there is tension, incongruency there. One thing to understand about the unconscious mind, that it is symbolic. And that's why we get those alarm bells ringing. We get that sense of something not being right. That's why at times we have really random dreams, because that's our unconscious mind untethered by the conscious mind because we're asleep, and it allows the unconscious mind to run wild. And that's why at times we can have really bizarre dreams. And that's why at times, we're kind of getting a message, but we just can't quite put our finger on it because it is so symbolic. Now, you may want to spend hours and hours figuring out what your dreams mean. You may want to spend hours and hours wondering what that sense of unease, that alarm bell is all about. Sometimes that's really useful to do. And it can, in some situations, be the difference between life and death. The important thing, I think, is understanding that that's what happens, of being okay with it, of perhaps taking a moment just to sort of think, hang on, what am I missing here? What more do I need to know before I take my next step? Just want to be sure that that's the right step. The unconscious mind, one of the prime directives, that it takes everything personally. So this is not about things out there. This is all about me, me, me. And that's, again, useful to know because it's seeing it from, I guess, an egocentric perspective. When we need to look beyond the ego, we need to look outside of ourselves. We need to look elsewhere. And that ties in with a number of the other prime directives. The concept of it being functioning better as a whole integrated unit, the trusting instincts, the maintaining perceptions. It's all about, is this about me? Is this about something else? And understanding where that difference lies and what that means. And again, the next presupposition, working on the unconscious mind works on the principle of least effort. That ties in with the needing clear orders to follow. It goes back to that sense of, if you're very vague about what you want, your unconscious mind will give you very vague solutions, which could well not be what you're actually looking for. So to ensure that your unconscious mind does what it does best, you have to be very specific and very precise. And think about this for a moment. You may well have been in a situation, and this is an example that comes up quite a lot, is you may suddenly decide you want a new car. And suddenly, everywhere you look, there are cars with the latest registration plate, with the latest registration number. Those cars were always there. But your unconscious mind, knowing now that you are looking for a new car, brings new cars into your awareness. And that's why you suddenly notice the registration plates. And so I'm recording this in early 2026. So you will suddenly become aware of plates which are, I don't know, what was it last year? It was 25 and 75. Next month, well, now we're in March, we will be getting the first 26 plates. And suddenly those will come into your awareness. And it could well be simply because I'm talking about it. When you go about your business over the next few days, you see those new registration plates. They were always going to be there, but that's what your unconscious mind does. It brings those into your awareness. And what you want it to do is you want to bring the right stuff into your awareness. And it can only do that if you're giving it very specific instructions. Otherwise, it'll just give you some vague notions, some vague ideas. It'll bring some quite random stuff into your awareness. And what you want to do is you want it to bring stuff into your awareness that is actually going to help you. And the final presupposition is understanding that the unconscious mind doesn't process negatives very well. And it goes back to that sense of, if I tell you not to think of a blue tree, what's the first thing that comes into your mind? And the reason that happens, because if you tell yourself not to do something, you first of all got to think about doing it, and then you've got to think about not doing it. So think about that for a moment. In fact, don't think about that for a moment. Because as soon as I tell you not to think about it, you'll start to think about it. And that's why we want to give our unconscious mind, always give our unconscious mind instructions in the positive. And what I find really vexing is sometimes you get a list of instructions which say, don't do this, don't do that, don't do the other, which is really, really unhelpful. Because our unconscious mind starts to go, well, why can't I do that? Why can't I do the other? And if you're telling me what not to do, that's all well and good, but what do I actually have to do? And again, that's useful to know. So if you're teaching yourself something new, if you're going to be teaching others, make sure you give all of those instructions in the positive. Tell people what to do. Make those instructions specific and clear. Work with the unconscious mind. So those are the 20 presuppositions. And I've already started to touch on why it's so helpful to know these and understand these. Because by knowing and understand these, we know that if we're going to make plans for ourselves, things we want to achieve, we need to keep it simple. We need to keep the orders clear. We need to be very specific and very precise in what we want. And it needs to be what we want rather than what we don't. Because that way, our unconscious mind will do what it does best. It will bring stuff into our awareness, which will help us achieve what we want to achieve. But understanding how we store all those memories gives us an ability to start to understand how we can use that to our advantage. And also what we can do if memories start to get in the way. And sometimes it's about just being okay with the notion that some memories are just out of sight, out of mind. And no matter how hard we try, they're just not going to come back until our unconscious mind says, you're ready to deal with this. And I always think with understanding the unconscious mind, it gives us a real head start in making changes in life. Whether they're big life plans, whether they're simply about the steps we go through each day to get through each day and make each day as good as it possibly can be. So it's understanding about energy levels and how the body stores, generates and transmits energy. It's understanding that we do need to repeat tasks so it becomes a habit and then becomes something we do unconsciously. And maybe when we're getting a bit frustrated because we're wanting to learn something new and it's just not happening, maybe it's just going to take a few more times. And we will get there because that's what the unconscious mind does. And I also think from a day-to-day living perspective, the concept of our unconscious mind being programmed to seek more and more, that's a real wake-up call, I always think, because it is so easy to end up stuck in a rut of feeling that each day is the same old, same old. And that's not helping our unconscious mind work, firstly, as a whole integrated unit, because there will be some conflict there, some incongruency there. We're not doing very much. Our unconscious mind wants us to do more, so there is a tension. Though we're not doing ourselves any favours by allowing that rut to become the norm. So just take a moment. Just think about those 20 presuppositions. Just think for a moment about what they all mean and how you can use them to your advantage. Think about how life can be differently if you're understanding them and using them and making your unconscious mind work for you in a way that gives you the very best results and the way forward that you want for yourself. Just imagine.